Hello, my lovely CAM followers. It is a pleasure to be here on such a drizzly, horrible day in the UK. I think all of us are supremely disappointed with our summer so far. But we will bring sunshine into your rooms this evening because we've got the beautiful Andrew Hale back to join us. Andy is on the CAM team of advisors, and I'm so happy. I'm so proud that he has agreed to be part of our team. Andy is a certified dog trainer and he has a background in human psychology, and he's very much part of the team because we believe at CAM it isn't just about medicating your dog, it's a bigger picture. And for us to help you, the owner, the caregiver, do the best for your dog, we've also got to give you the tools to have good communication, to understand what's happening in your own head, how to deal with your own emotions so that you can make the right decisions. Now, before Andy introduces himself, I'm just going to promote one of the amazing resources from the lovely CAM. So this is our children's book. It is an illustrated book, as you can see it, with lovely Diane Messam. It was written by myself and illustrated by an amazing man called Phil, who'd been following CAM for a while, and we'd helped him with his arthritic dog. So when I put a shout out and said, help me create a children's book, he spent 2 years doing the illustrations for this book. And the idea behind it is that we don't just teach the child, we teach the whole family. So as the parent reads the child to the book, reads the book to the child, we get group learning, which what I feel is really, really important. With it being such a hot topic at the moment in the news, what with changes to potentially Aggressive Dog Act, breeding reform, that sort of thing, we've got quite a lot in the news at the moment with the posties saying that dog bites have gone up by 1/3 in recent years. I really want people to understand that these behaviours often have an underlying cause, and we really need to be cognizant of them. And this book is all about that because it describes my lovely Holly going on her journey, and as she got older and the pain of arthritis started to take hold, her behaviour changed. And if it wasn't for the amazing family identifying the signs, going to the vets and getting a diagnosis, she too could have been potentially labelled as aggressive when actually she was demonstrating pain. So please support us. The book is available in the CAM shop. It's an absolute bargain. It's, I think, £8. So do us a favour, purchase it, take it to your library, take it to your primary school, take it to your kids' organisations. It's a must. Right, Andy, tell us about yourself.
Hello, Hannah.
Hello.
How you doing? All right, good to see you again. I've just dashed in from the rain, everybody, so that's why I'm looking a bit big draggled, because it's pouring down. Oh my God, I've just come in. It's good to see you, and do you know what? You're right about that. It's such an important book, and I was thinking, this is a bit of an aside for it, but the bulk of my cases are quite complex cases with these dogs that people might see as being quite dangerous potentially, and I've not worked with the one dog, Hannah, yet that wasn't in pain.
Wow.
Physical pain often, but also emotional pain or social pain.
Yeah.
And they're just as and it's all interconnected, right? So yes. A lot of these discussions about the increase in bites and looking for more training options, I'm thinking we need more listening to the dog options, because there is, for me, aggression in inverted commas, especially those dogs who are likely to bite and do harm. There is aspects of that which is part of their survival story.
Yes.
Yeah. And often it's a pain element. And so I've always found there's a pain element, physical pain, often emotional pain, social pain. They're all equally important and interconnected, of course.
Yeah. And I think if people really realise that, you can actually see the anguish in their eyes. So when I see a dog that some people might label as aggressive, say in the consult room, waiting room, if you actually look beyond, you can see that they don't want to be there. They don't want that. That is not the situation they ever wanted to be in. And you can see it in their eyes. And I just feel we are really responsible for not putting them in those situations. We need to listen. So hopefully that book will start teaching the younger generation as well as the older generation in a kind of like a mutually collaborative way. So what are we talking about tonight?
Yes, so I'm a certified behaviourist, advisor with CAM, and behaviour consultant with Pet Remedy, and I've got a dog centre care group. That's a little bit about me, but I've got a human psychology background, and for me, there's just so much that connects us all, right? And I think that's a really good place to be. both in human behavioral science, animal behavioral science, we keep going through these loops of, oh, I found the answer to everything. Oh, I know I found the answer to everything. And we can never fully find the answer to everything because of the unique nature of our individual lived experience.
Yeah.
You know, you and I can be in the same place at the same time, experiencing the same thing and be affected by it differently.
Yeah.
So actually, there's three things I think that connect us with our doggies. One is to feel heard. This is going to be kind of what we'll look at today. So first is to feel heard. We all want to feel heard, right? Especially when we're trying to communicate need. We don't want to be dismissed. We don't want to be ignored. We definitely don't want to be corrected, which is a big thing we hear in dog training. Got to correct that. The second is to feel safe. We need to feel safe. Now, what's interesting about safety, Hannah, is if we think about the safety of another, we tend to have a bias towards physical safety because that's what our brain can get feedback from. But for our own brain, it is just as and often more focused on emotional safety and social safety. Yeah. That is why you can be safe, but not feel safe.
Yes.
This is really important for a lot of these doggies that are giving these behaviors about them. You know, you can't, the wonderful Rachel Leather, who's an expert on trauma, highly recommend people check Rachel's work out because she's come from human trauma, sexualized trauma, actually into the dog world and looking at the trauma around dogs. She says you can't teach safety because you have to feel it.
Wow.
So that's important. And guess what? A lot of dog training stuff is around teaching behaviors because that means the dog's going to be okay. But does the dog actually feel any safer? And there's a human saying, there's a human psychology saying, which is the path to coercion is often laid with good intention.
Yes.
So I might think I know what's best for my husband to feel safe. If my husband does this, this, and this, he'll feel safe. Will he? Unless I ask him. So that's the second thing that unites us, feeling safe. And the final thing is this the R word, the relief word that a lot of people know I talk about a lot. Because for me, relief is one of the most important words in the psychology of behavior. Because if you feel physical pain, emotional pain, social pain, you will seek relief from it. The whole point in feeling that, pain is not designed to be some kind of punishment for us. It's to let us know this isn't right.
There's something wrong. It's something needs to be corrected.
Yeah. So how many of these behaviors then we see in dogs are we labeling bad, naughty, dominant, whatever we want to call, and it's just the dog seeking relief. And we're not giving them relief. So it's important. So that's the thing that I like to talk about through these lenses, because whether you're the clinician, the caregiver, the trainer, the groomer, the dog, we all have an experience in that process. Yeah. And a lot of the chats you and I have had is about how do we bring that process so that we can connect better through that.
Yeah.
Rather than live in a place of detached judgments and expectations.
Yeah, 100%. So when I met you, I kind of really thought in a very 2D way, Andy's going to come on and he's going to help us allow clients to understand themselves, to communicate with the team around them. But we've jumped light years ahead, and we're talking way much more about, as you say, the interconnection between the dog, the owner, the vet professionals, the team, but then the outer team as well, as you say, the dog groomers, the pet shop owners, the dog walkers. So it is, hold on to your seats, guys. The next 45 minutes is going to be a bit of a whirlwind, and you're going to be grabbing phrases, jotting them down, watching this again, because I do that. What are we talking about tonight? Awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance, and advocacy. Come on.
A lot of A's there. Again, of A's, which is quite cool. Maybe we should do a letter each time. Oh my God, that'd be cool. Let's do B's today. A's. So I love this. So awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance. These are quite a heavy construct within human psychology anyway. And we've also got advocacy. So ultimately then, for our dog with special support needs, physical support needs, arthritis, chronic conditions, emotional support needs, social support needs, ideally we want to be able to advocate for those needs. But advocacy actually isn't as simple as it seems, because even if I think, do you know what, I'm not going to judge my dog, I'm going to be compassionate and be there for them. What do I think I'm advocating for? It comes back to what I was saying about my husband. Oh, I know what's best for Kieran, I'll advocate for him. But how do I know that that's what he needs and what I should be focusing in on? And that's why I want to unpack these words as we go through. Right. So let's
just
start with
explain to people what advocacy means, just in case they're a little bit like, oh, I'm just a little bit crippled by, do I have the real true meaning of what advocacy means?
So it depends on how you want to apply it and what definition you want, but in this particular case, it's identifying the care and support needs of another and being able to communicate those and advocate for those and hold space for those.
Yeah, cool.
So you can advocate for yourself. I need to advocate for we were talking about this a little bit off air about how important it is for our own emotional health and how we have to be happy with Andy, be happy with Hannah, and say, actually, no, that's not okay. Actually, and I will have those.
We had a little one-to-one earlier. I feel so much better.
Good. Bill's in the post. So let's think about this then. Let's start with awareness. Awareness is such a cool word. And it's the first step, really. So when I go and see my clients then, the first thing I have to do is myself turn up to be aware. I have to have awareness about what's going on. I need to be available. Awareness is very much about available. It's another A, Hannah. I didn't want to overdose with it, isn't it? So being truly available means I'm going to be available to this situation. I'm going to leave my judgments and expectations at the door. I'm going to leave my ego at the door. I'm going to leave my biases at the door. So guess what? It's quite hard, right?
It's very hard.
But true awareness is really connected to growth. We're all growing all the time, as human beings. We're learning different things and having experiences, and that comes through the more aware we are. For example, I love talking to people and hearing their stories, especially those who've had challenges, because by learning or truly hearing their stories, I become more aware of their experiences, and that awareness helps me grow more as a human being, because if we're not aware of the stories of those around us, we just only know our own experience.
Yeah, we can be very, very narrow-minded and very insular, can't we?
And we can easily fall into that, actually, Hannah, because our brain's kind of designed for that in some ways. When we become mature, our brain wants to think, okay, what are my belief systems? What are my value systems? What's my attitude to stuff? And it wants to kind of protect that, because this is my safe worldview. This is why we end up with polarization with things like religion and politics and football teams and stuff like that. The brain's like, okay, this is what I think is safe. The problem then is it can, if we're not careful, get very embedded that we end up seeing everything through quite a limited lens.
Yeah.
And then we have our cognitive distortions and cognitive biases that want to try and support what we think we already believe and feel.
It's more comfortable, isn't it?
It's more comfortable. And this is why, I've said this before, there's two things about us humans. The first thing is we all love to judge.
Yeah.
We all love to have a good old judge because our brain's designed for it. They're called cognitive appraisals. There's no real thinking involved. It's just based on the very limited information we have, based on our own filters, our own belief systems, our own value systems. We're going to make a judgment. So I'm going to judge you on your behavior that I'm seeing without knowing anything about you, anything about what you're going through. So we love to judge. And that's
which is really bad online, because you don't even get context. You don't get all the information. If me and meeting you in person, the amount of information I'm collecting gives me a little bit more ability to make, conclusions, assumptions. They're probably going to be wrong. But text online, people go for the throat, don't they? They have proper assumptions, shortcutting to what their conclusions will be. And that's one of the things that we really, really try and control in Holly's Army. We really, really want people to be kind and open and giving and show awareness. So
that's the point, be more aware of what the other's experience might be, but aware of yourself sometimes as well. We have a very heavily defensive part of our brain. I call mine Bob. It's good to label that part of the brain. So Bob is that part of my brain which is very defensive, very emotionally driven, has been kind of nurtured through my own experiences and trauma and everything else. Bob just wants to keep me safe. Yeah. Bob's more likely to use destructive language. Bob's more likely to say, Andy, you see, you're not good enough. I told you you're not good enough. Yeah. Or they're having a go at you. They're making it about you. You must do something. And the trouble online is because we don't have all the nuances there, because we're not so aware, and often our Bob gets going. You've just got loads of people's Bobs talking to each other,
Yes.
Those things you see online, the videos. So you've got the gate there, and you've got the two dogs either side of the gate going, and when the gate opens and they can meet each other, like, oh, hi, how are you? I'm just going to have a drink. I think that would be the same with some of these arguments you see online. If you could suck them out of virtualness into real life, they'd be like, oh, hi, how are you? I'm really sorry. I didn't realize you're having a bad day. And we see this. The good example of this is cars. When you're in your car, right, and somebody cuts you up, you're likely to be like, give them whatever. If you bumped into them in the supermarket with your trolley, you'd be like, I'm terribly sorry. How are you? Because you can connect, and you're more aware of them as a human being.
Yeah, you're so true about that. Yes. So
awareness is important. So awareness is about growth. It's the first place we have to start. So you as a clinician, then you have to think, right, I need to be aware now of this environment. I need to be aware of my client and what they're going through and that kind of thing. And also, obviously, from a medical point of view, try and build some awareness of what the dog might be going through. And then the next step for us is supporting the awareness of the other about the reality of the situation, how we find it professionally.
Okay.
So I know when I meet a client from a behavioural point of view, there is a chance that they might have a belief about their dog's behaviour that is maybe 180 away from the potential reality because of the prevalence of the dominance model or whatever it is, that's there. So we need to support awareness. We need to support that awareness and recognise that can be quite tricky. There could be all sorts of reasons why somebody can struggle to have that awareness. And especially some of the things that comes from that part of the brain that wants to stop that, which is like, I know what this is about. So actually our first role is to support awareness. And that's, I think, what we ultimately have some kind of responsibility over.
Yeah.
How do I help you to be aware of your dog's care and support needs? How do I help you to be aware that actually it's because your dog's struggling and might be in pain, actually?
Yeah.
Or whatever it is that we need to think about. And that awareness is
really gentle as well, because we talk about this a lot, the ambassadors who run Holly's Army. We have quite a lot of people that arrive and can have very strong opinions, and they're very proud of their management plan. And the ambassadors, with their additional training, might look at it and go, well, that's not working, that's not going to work, there's no evidence. The worst thing you can do is to go in and tell somebody what they're doing is wrong. So
100%.
We've had huge amounts of Zoom meetings and further training of coaching people, accepting, being aware of their understanding, appreciating it, respecting it, and then slowly giving them options of other awarenesses. Man, it's hard. It's really hard, because the last thing we want them to do is to feel threatened and leave. Because if they feel threatened, they become aggressive and leave. So it's really difficult, and hats off to the ambassadors, because quite often you can see people poaching in with further inappropriate advice. And the ambassadors are sitting there going, no, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to coach them away from that potentially out of date approach. It's complex.
And that's why awareness, although it's the first one of the kind of A's, it can be a tricky one to navigate, because we are also having to be, as the practitioner, whether you're the behavioural practitioner or the clinical practitioner, aware of so many things. That level of awareness is like, I can see this person's really stressed, or I can see this person's really tried hard, but they've been given poor information. All this is part of our awareness. And that's why I like the term supportive awareness. We're trying to support their ability to be more aware of the potential reality, and to do that in a way that they don't feel threatened by it. Because we have a part of our brain that is dedicated to the fear of social rejection. It's called social evaluative threat. Now, this is tied up with Bob again, right? So even saying to somebody, can I give you some advice, Hannah? There's a good chance you're going to set Bob off.
Yes.
Even just by doing that, right? Because if that person thinks, you might think, oh, okay, I'd like some advice, that's fine. But most of the time, they're like, why, what's wrong with you then? You know, what you're trying to say, you know, all the kind of things that kick off. You know? So we do have to be really careful about it.
A lot of people don't actually, you know, wait for an invitation. They don't ask for an invitation. It's really bad when people come and go, well, you should do that. You know.
Yeah.
Okay.
And remember, the path coercion is often laid with good intention. So is this. People often intend well. They like, oh, I want to help you. But what they're kind of saying is, I know better than you.
Yeah.
Or at least that's the perception of our Bobby brain when we're already in quite a vulnerable state quite often.
Yeah.
I think if you've built a good relationship, you and I are quite good buddies now, we've known each other a while, it's easier just to throw stuff in, because my brain might think, yeah, I really want to listen to what Hannah wants to tell me, because I've got evidence from the past that actually when she tells me stuff, it's worth listening to.
Yeah.
But it is tricky, and we do have to navigate it. And I think one thing that's missing in behavioral practitioner work, and maybe vets to a point, although I think you're doing a lot of work here, is how to do that, because we kind of are counselors in that sense. We have to be able to turn up and hear a story enough and be able to look at moving that awareness through. Because we used to use terms like compliance. I hate that word now, but we used to think, how do I make them more compliant? Which is again about kind of coercion and the way
how do
that
I make them adhere to my treatment plan? You know, how do I make them do it? Yeah, not cool.
Well, this is why these A's are so important, because if we can support the awareness that we want, and one thing to bear in mind here, everything is an invitation and everything is feedback. So when you think about that, so I'm going to, everything I'm going to ask is an invitation to the other, and I'm going to wait for the feedback. Because that gives you an idea about whether they're shifting with you or whether they're pushing against you. And that's quite an act, especially when you're under pressure and you're under stress. And you guys, you know, I've said this before, Hannah, hats off to my clinical colleagues. I used to do behavioural clinics before COVID, and I'd have the luxury of 20 minutes with a big history form ahead of time. And I'd do maybe 3 or 4, and I'd be knackered at the end of 3 or 4. You guys, you have all these animals that you see, 10 minutes, 15 minutes if you're lucky.
Yeah, and then also you've got to think of the environment as well. So the owners come in, they're stressed, they've been sat in a waiting room protecting their dog or their cat from all the others in the waiting room, the noise, the kerfuffle, and then they come into a small room. They're always small rooms, and people are stepping over each other, and they're in an emotional stress state, you know, because they want the best for their pet, but they also want to get the best out of the consultation. You've got the table in the way, and then the vet's looking at the computer because it's always facing the other way, and everything in that room makes it more difficult.
Yeah. Well, there's a realization, I think, in veterinary and behavioural circles that a lot of the old stuff just isn't fit for purpose now. But we used to treat things in such a symptomatic way, and it was easier then. Which, okay, yeah, take this, here's a pill, do that, do whatever. Or in behavioural terms, here's a handout, do that training, off you go. But we now realise that these things are often, they're very rarely, with the exception of some of the kind of everyday stuff, they're very rarely not multifactorial. You know, it's very rare that it is just that. Is that the primary now, or is that the secondary? And we used to say, is it behaviour or is it pain? But that's just not fit for purpose now.
No.
We have to ask, is it physical pain? Is it emotional pain? Is it social pain? Because there's something there. So this awareness is important, and it's tricky. And I think we just have to keep getting better at it. One of the big things, though, this is important, and this is a golden rule for human therapy as a therapist, that you can't be available to another if you're not in a regulated state yourself.
Right.
So now that's all very wonderful in the human setting where you have hour chunks, you have a bit of a gap and you think, right. But like you say, if you're stressed, if you're tired, it's hard to truly be available to the needs of another when you're already in a dysregulated state yourself, or you're already anxious or nervous or tired or frustrated, or all these kind of things. It's just really hard. So where are those spaces in that clinician's day to find a chance to reground, to decompress? These are extra questions that we have to ask of ourselves. And just before I went on holiday, I was due to see a dog, and I just wasn't feeling it that morning. And I knew this dog is a potentially dangerous dog. And I rang up the clients and I said, you know what, I really want to give you the very best today, but I don't have the bandwidth today. I've got a few things I need to do. I need to turn up fully. Most people really respect that.
Yes.
Because so we rearranged for the next day when I could go along and feel safe.
Yeah.
I didn't feel safe, and I wouldn't turn up. It wouldn't be fair on them. And the last thing you want is a behavioural practitioner with a dog who bites, turning up and getting bitten. What does that say to them? I don't know, it can happen sometimes. It can happen. But for them, it just becomes validating that their dog is somehow, whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, awareness. So we've touched on awareness. There's a lot of things to think about there. It's a really important thing. And awareness, like everything, you have to practice it. And it starts from thinking, I'm going to just allow myself to be more aware of the world around me and people around me and not jump in for those judgments. We need a healthier relationship to judgment, because we can't help it. We're going to judge.
Yeah.
But it's what we load on it. It's like, okay, what does that information tell me then? I'm not going to act on it. I'm not going to let Bob dive in. What does that tell me? And often it tells us something about ourselves, actually, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So being available is really important. Also, it's good. That's an extra thing. This is more of a human thing. It's nothing to do with clinicians, but it's also okay not to be available sometimes.
Yes,
that's
and
really
that's
important.
not admitting defeat. It's just saying, actually, I need to, as you say, decompress. I've got to get myself in a better state, ready to offer myself again. We've talked about this before, and I'm like you, offer up things that some people might make you think that you're vulnerable. I did get compassion fatigue. I did get burnout, and it's not a nice place. It's a very strange state, and I would never want to go back there again. So learning boundaries, being able to say no is acceptable, isn't it?
100%, because we have to think about our own self-esteem. Our worth never changes, but our value of it does. We are always enough, but we don't always see it. And that devaluing of self is often because of the experiences around others, the expectations of others, the judgments of others, what those people said to us back along that make us feel lesser than. So we have to build, healthy good emotional health is like good physical health. You have to work at it. And even if you're doing good at it, it doesn't mean, like with physical health, for example, it doesn't mean you're not going to get a cough or a cold or sprain your ankle. You're going to have your ups or downs. So a lot of stuff I see online, which is about avoid this, avoid that, do this in a bit, you can't. You're going to have your ups and downs. It's about being more resilient to those ups and downs.
Yes.
And that's where healthy self-esteem comes in. And you're going to have your ups and downs there. But and then good, healthy boundaries. Boundaries for me are like an extra layer of self. Healthy boundaries will help me filter what I put out and also what I let in.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. Low self-esteem invariably means porous boundaries. So two things go together. And this is one universal truth. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And if that no is you, your partner, your husband, your wife, your dogs, your whatever. And when we think about compassion fatigue, specifically, compassion is not finite. We can be compassionate a million times a day, all the time. So when we think about compassion fatigue, it's like, well, I just haven't got enough compassion to give, right? That's how we feel. But actually, compassion fatigue is about when we don't have enough compassion for ourselves.
Wow,
That's it, because you can't turn up to others if you're not turning up for yourself at this point. So I think when you start to feel those symptoms of compassion fatigue, it's always about the fact that I'm not looking after, my boundaries aren't great at the moment, or I'm not looking after myself, or something's not working. Not that somehow you have a little pot of compassion and you've given it all out.
Yes. Nice. Like that. That's a definite take home for me.
So awareness. So once we've got awareness, then once we've supported awareness, the next day is acknowledgement. And that is another hard one when we think about it. All this stuff just shows you how hard it can be to ask somebody to truly turn up for their dog and advocate for them. Because first of all, they've got to become aware of what the problem is. And we've already discussed lots of things you can navigate there. Then they have to acknowledge it. Now, we've talked about this a lot. You can let somebody be aware that, look, your dog's getting old now and they've got arthritis and they can't do those 5-mile walks a day. It's too much for them. And that's why they keep sitting down all the time, or we have to keep dragging them along, or whatever it is. Even if part of their brain thinks, I'm aware of that. And I think a lot of the time people are anyway. They struggle to acknowledge it.
Yes.
Because of the things that would mean. Oh my God, my dog's getting old. Oh my God, my dog might not be here one day. You know, there's a lot of things that come with acknowledgement. You know,
So it's like a lot of cognitive obstacles, aren't they, between awareness and acknowledgement?
Yeah, a huge amount. Because to truly acknowledge it means all sorts of stuff that you don't want to necessarily face up to.
Yeah.
You know, in a way, if I go and meet a dog behaviorally and the person's like, yeah, my dog's being stubborn, or my dog's being dominant, whatever. And then if I'm like, I think it's because your dog's really stressed. That's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we think, well, my dog's happy. Aren't they happy? They're having a great life, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's easy to hide behind a label. You know, my dog's reactive. Maybe it's because they're not coping very well. Yeah. Wow, that's a lot to acknowledge, because it also goes against some of those norms in that brain that we have as part of our value system and belief systems.
Yeah. Well, I can remember Kathy saying to me that the brain is designed to shortcut. That's what it wants to find the paths of least resistance as quickly as possible and cement them in place, because it wants to be efficient.
Yes.
And something that you've just said reminds me of clinical teaching, in that when you have an owner come into the room, you need to be aware of their observations, their perceptions, their beliefs, but you need to take their observation and distill it down to clinical signs. So somebody might come into me and say he's really depressed. That's their perception, their observations, and I respect that. But then I need to go beyond that and say, so what is he showing you to make you feel that he's depressed? So I can bring factual data, actual behaviors, actual activities, actual responses, so that I don't get trapped into following their belief system. And I think that's quite another thing that vets are trying to do without talking about it.
I think that's really important, because it's the same on my side of the fence as well, because we have to be available to what somebody else is telling us, right? And with the vocabulary that they use, and with the perception that they have, because perception is everything, of course, and that's all they have. But then we have to allow that to be kind of funneled into us then thinking about, where's the evidence? You know, where's the data? Where's the and also allowing ourselves to say, that's really interesting. I think we need to park that bit. But that bit you just said there, let's look at that more, because that's often our way of saying, I don't know how I'm going to deal with that bit, but I can look at some extra bits for that bit. And this is why it's you know, a really good practitioner is somebody who can navigate this stuff. This is why we're talking about it today, but we have to practice it. You know, nobody just wakes up thinking I can do all these things. And this is where going back to the awareness is really important, because the awareness is still going on while we add in the acknowledgement. We're thinking, right, I feel now that you're more aware of this situation. Do I feel that you're able to acknowledge it? And if not, what are those barriers for you? What is it that you're looking at? And this is why building safe professional relationships with our clients is really so important. It can be challenging, I know, and but we want them. You said a minute ago, we can't just go in and say, oh yeah, that's not important, or yeah, no, you're wrong, because already now, when are they going to share stuff with us, especially something as vulnerable as saying, do you know what, I'm really worried that I'm going to lose my dog. Or I'm really worried about this, or I'm really worried about that. Some people will share that willingly, other people they can't very easily. And that's what we need to know, because that's the thing that's stopping them from acknowledging that situation, the situation that they're now aware of. So acknowledgement is really important, and there's a lot of I'm
silent because I'm just thinking about all the cases, how many times I've been in an environment that we can chat about the presentation, and you can see the light bulbs going off. They're offering their observations. They're beginning to assimilate with my observations. There's beginning to be some dawnings that actually my dog is showing signs of pain. And the amount of times that then at the end of the consult, they might grab the lead and let the dog jump into the back of the car, or they'll go for a jog, or they'll throw the ball. And you're like, wait a minute. The acknowledgement didn't kind of happen. The awareness grew, and then it channeled back down again, a bit like Harry Potter. And it's fascinating. I do see that a lot, actually.
And it takes time. It takes a long time for the brain to process stuff. Because Kathy, what Kathy said there about the kind of quick stuff, that's that cognitive appraisal I was talking about. The brain doesn't want to think about it. It just want to make a quick, instant thing based on the information that it perceives it has, which is often faulty data, actually, because it's based on unconscious biases and all sorts of stuff that might go on. So it's very tricky, actually, and it can take time. Oh my God, how many things have we had in our own lives where we thought, yeah, I get that. And I think about when I lost my mother and when I went through processing that and how long it took to really get to a point that I could live with that pain more, because you never quite lose it. So it can be very hard for people. There's a lot of things that go there. So that acknowledgement is, it can be tricky and it can take time. This stuff isn't a case of thinking in that consult room today, we're going to get you to be very aware of it and we're going to get you to acknowledge it. It doesn't quite happen like that. We just have to make sure that we're asking the right questions regularly. And this is why I love the role that vet nurses have in a lot of this stuff, because they're the ones who can be that supportive mechanism in between the kind of time with the clinicians. You see the same with my husband at the hospice where he works. It's the nurses actually who hold a lot of the space, because the consultant might only come around once a day.
No, so like I was just trying to think of the ways that we can help professionals, no matter what context they work in, allow time for acknowledgement. So I'm just thinking of habits that I might have, and I know that I'll say to a client, right, we've unpacked a lot today, why don't we arrange to discuss it further at our next consult, come back with more questions, take away what I've said, think about it, let's talk about it again. But what other kind of things do we need to do to allow acknowledgement?
Well, it is about creating a safe kind of working relationship. I think that's important, and also asking the right questions. Because it's no point saying to somebody, I don't know, is that okay? Is that clear for you? It's just yes or no. And they're likely, if they don't have much of a relationship yet, they're likely to say yes. How many times have we all done that? Oh, yeah. When I give some of my kind of lectures and things, and I say, even just saying something like, any questions, that nobody wants to put their hands up and be the first one to ask a question. No. So we have to be clever about how we ask these things and how we... it's always good for people, I think, to have practical things to think about, like, when I see you next, have a think about this and do those observations and let me know, because they can come back with something really practical, and they can come back with those observations, and you can then tell by what they say, you are aware and you're acknowledging it, because you can tell by what they're saying. Like you say, if they're saying, well, we did this and we jumped out the car and then we threw the ball, and when we came back I noticed that the dog was limping. Okay, so they're aware, but they haven't acknowledged what you said about the lifestyle management. So I think we just have to work on these things and build this up. And especially with these chronic cases, physical, emotional, doesn't matter. It's about a time thing. They have to take on a lot of information.
I'm having lovely flashbacks. It's quite nice, actually. I was working in Brighton, and we had a gentleman who had a dog that was showing distinct signs of discomfort, physically, emotionally, the way that the dog interacted with people, the way that the dog moved, postured. You could see physical changes that's suggestive of underlying discomfort. And the conversation with him was challenging, but by inviting him to come back, for me, and also I think I practiced playing vulnerability myself. I said things like, I'd rather be wrong than be right and let you leave without me having tried to help you. I'd rather be over assessing and giving you too much advice rather than under giving you advice. And I'm available. I want to see you to come back. I want us to look at the case together again. And lo and behold, he did take the analgesics and he did come back 2 weeks later, and the dog did stay on the pain medications. But I think there's got to be a lot of invitation, hasn't it? You've got to be available. You've got to be available, haven't you?
And everything, like I said a moment ago, everything is an invitation and we have to wait for the feedback. Now, the reality is you can't make people change their view, see things differently, act differently. There's only so much we can do. There's always going to be those cases. And this is where we have to protect ourselves professionally and recognize you as Hannah, me as Andy, what we actually turn up to do and what we actually can do. And if anything goes off of that as a tangent, we can't hold that responsibility because we're not there to make somebody do something. We're not there to enforce compliance or anything else, and equally, we're not there to make somebody like us and see value in what we do. We're going to be people who will see you, Hannah, and I think any dog that finds you is a lucky dog. But there's still going to be people who are going to come away saying, well, she's a load of rubbish. And, in the space of about 10 days, I had a most amazing review. I shared, I don't normally share reviews much, but I did on that one, only because, it was a complicated case. And I thought, But, the week before that, I had a woman who wanted some money back because she thought it's just a load of rubbish. And, she wanted to do what the guy on the telly does. And I replied to her saying, the first thing I said, I'm really sorry that you didn't see value in what I offer.
Yeah.
Rather than, I'm thinking, well, that's what's happened there, because, we have to have some confidence in what we offer, but not everybody's going to connect to it. And it's just the way it is. And that's how we protect ourselves with our self-esteem. Yeah. And to think about, it's very easy because when you get an email like that, Bob wants to make it about me. Whereas I have to allow myself to think, what does it say to me? What it says to me is she didn't value my services, and that's fine. That's her prerogative, but it doesn't make me lesser than because of it, because I know that I do my best in the way that I do stuff. And it's the same clinically. So we can't force this stuff. So it is an invitation. It's an invitation of us trying to do these things in the right way. But some people, there's all sorts of reasons why people are unavailable to stuff. All sorts of reasons.
I've got to drop a little plug in for one of my really good friends. I was chatting to her last night, Julia Robertson, from Garland.
Yes.
We were talking about life, how difficult it can be. And she gave me a tip, which I absolutely loved. There's a tendency to say, oh, well, that happened to me, it happened to me. But if you just change it to that happened for me, it changes your whole context. So even bad things, that bad thing happened to me, but that bad thing happened for me because it allowed me to see this, this, and this, and it opened this and that door. Just changing that one word can really change your mindset about the situations you find yourself in.
And that's the thing, because of the fact that we as a species, we have this big thinking brain and that language is important as part of that. Our self-language is very important for that. So remember, Bob will use destructive language. I, as Andy, need to try and use descriptive language, is what you're talking about there, because it's more about description. So, yes, and Bob will want to make it about me. You see, you're not good enough. You can't do the job. Why are you bothering? All the kind of things. And the thing is, if our emotional health, if our physical health is low, Bob has a bigger voice. Just does. If you're tired, if you're stressed, if you are not being compassionate enough for yourself, and those boundaries are starting to get a bit porous, Bob's voice will get louder, and that's just what happens. And the same applies to that person in that consult room today. You don't know where their Bob is. You don't know where they are with thinking about these things and other life events that come along. And with our dogs, oh God, Arthur's my old boy now. We have our moments with him where I think, I wonder if this is the time now. But he keeps coming back and he's doing all right at the moment. But his eyes saw my mother because she was alive when he was there. My own husband's eyes have never seen my mother.
Yeah.
So when Arthur's time comes, not only am I losing my boy, I'm losing everything that connects to, all the things that he's bared witness to, all the things that he has connected to me through his very being. So it's no wonder then that people are like, this is hard for me to acknowledge right now because there's so much stuff that comes with it on many levels, actually. So acknowledgement is tough, but it's another part of the process that we can support people with and think, right, so wonder what the barriers are for you to acknowledge this. What is it that we can look at here? How can I frame what I do? And this just takes a bit of time sometimes. Then we come into acceptance. Now, this is where best outcomes come on every level. Because when somebody has gone from awareness to acknowledgement to acceptance, so you can acknowledge something and still not accept it.
Yeah.
You want to speak to my husband working in end of life. These A's are really, really powerful when you think about end of life. Being aware of what your diagnosis is, acknowledging it. Some people just really struggle to accept it. And actually, just anecdotally, my husband says that those who are able to accept and find peace are the ones who tend to have the more peaceful end, just anecdotally. Interesting. So acceptance is where we want to get to. That's where we get the best outcomes. Somebody's like, you know what, despite all my own fears, my biases, my beliefs, my values, I can still accept that that's the case.
Yeah.
Because that actually is a great place to be, because a lot of that process of working through awareness and acknowledgement, people can find that very difficult. It is neurologically and physiologically, that nervous system can be all over the place, churning tummies, going through kind of similar processes to grief, actually, anger, denial, all the kind of things.
I'm just thinking about the acceptance, and there's somebody very close to me who I love very, very, very dearly, who is aware, he's acknowledged, and he's not accepting. And it's physical change, age-related change. Unfortunately, to all of us, we will not be able to bypass the inevitable, and very unhappy because he can't accept. It can leave people in quite an emotional stew, can't it? Always fighting against themselves almost.
And that brings us into what we discussed years ago, probably, but the 3 C's: control, change, and choice. Our brain wants to have control over outcome. It's obsessed with it. When it can't control outcome because things go out of our control, and health diagnoses are one of them, for example, we want to change it. Our brains, how do I change it? How do I change it? There must be a way out. There must be a way out. And we can get stuck in change. Same with the grieving process. You lose somebody, you feel that I can't control outcome now because I've lost that person. So you want to change it. And we can get stuck in change a lot. But then at some point, sometimes with help from others, but our own realization as we pass through that, when we find the final C, which is choice, we reckon, actually, I do have a choice about what I do about these feelings, how I move forwards with these feelings, then that gives us control again.
Yeah.
And I remember when my father passed away, my mother went through a period of, because they've been together like 50 plus years, it's nuts, right? And I remember
my parents have been together for way longer than that.
Yeah, God, brilliant. I know, it's amazing. She obviously she struggled with it, and she just didn't do much. And one morning I came down for breakfast and she was already made up. She put her makeup on, put a bit of slap on, put on a nice blouse and a skirt and stuff, and she's like, I'm ready to go out. So that day she made that choice.
Yes.
Made that choice that I've got a life to live. Yeah. And she managed to come out of the change cycle. So acceptance, so she found acceptance.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the key. So acceptance is a powerful thing. And I would say almost exclusively the best outcomes I get with clients are when I've managed to, or they've managed to find that way to acceptance. They've accepted the fact that that dog might never go down the beach and be really sociable or whatever, and I think that's important.
And that's such a massive overlap with chronic disease management and behaviour. They're both basically a chronic situation that you're not going to go back to baseline normality. You have to accept that there are going to be changes. I don't want to call them limitations because that's so negative, but there are certain aspects of the perceived life you were going to have that need to be replaced with others. We try not to call it restrictions and limitations, and because we want people to realize that the arthritis journey is not the end of the road. It's just a change in direction.
Yeah. And that's where another A comes in. We've got another A. Oh my God.
Another one.
And that's adaptations, which is a better word than those other words. I think I love that because we have to make adaptations. And one of the adaptations we make is to our expectations, of course.
Yes.
So it's not always physical adaptations. It's adaptate. We have to adapt a lot.
And I feel a lot for owners, especially because we're getting more and more evidence that osteoarthritis is a disease of the younger dog. The figures are astounding, and they've gone from 20% of dogs over the age of 1 in 1996. We're now hitting 40% of all dogs. There's obviously breed variations. Some breeds are more predisposed than others. But these are dogs that are 8 months, 1 year, 14 months, and that owner's expectations for their life with that dog, they've got it mapped out. This is what they were going to do. That's why I got a dog. And I think one of the aspects that we need to really be cognizant of in providing health support for these dogs and their owners is tackling those topics. Because for me, just in a physical medicine sense, if an owner can't accept that there's going to be need to be adaptations, that dog's going to permanently be in situations of destabilizing the disease. So if the modifications to life aren't in place, they are more prone to suffering through repeated incidences of acute flares. So education of the owner to have awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance, to become the advocate is so important. Do you see that, guys? We've brought it all the way around back into OA management, because otherwise it will lead to suffering for the pet and suffering for the owner. It's so important.
It is, and that's why these words, actually, when you think about it, is the key. It's going through awareness, acknowledgement to find acceptance. You can't, and sometimes people can, in that moment, have all those things happen. I think I've shared with you before, I worked with a guy, very traditional view of dogs. His dog would bark at the dogs. He'd hit the dog on the end of the bum with the end of the lead. When I met him, that's what he was doing. When we went through this process of supported awareness, he was able to say to me, do you know, Andy, I realise now that the reason I hit my dog with the lead is because I'm angry and embarrassed.
Yeah.
That was powerful for me, because no pointy finger, shaming, judgy stuff could ever have brought into that sense of self-realization, going through awareness, acknowledge, and acceptance of himself. Himself. It's huge. So when we get to acceptance, you see, this is why I think so awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance, they're a psychological construct that we look at a lot through therapies. We improve awareness, we go to acknowledgement, and then we move to acceptance.
Amazing.
I've added in the extra A because I've added about 10 extra A's today. But anyway, there's a competition for everybody. Keep adding A's.
Keep adding A's, guys.
Yeah. The no naughty words then.
No.
Yeah. To be true. So this brings beautifully to advocacy then. Because when you are accepting of that situation truly, because remember, you've become truly aware on all levels, your self-awareness, the awareness for your dog, the awareness of the whatever's going on, and you've acknowledged that. Remember, acknowledgement also isn't just about acknowledging, my dog has got this going on. It's also acknowledgement of the feelings that we feel ourselves and what that means and what I need to process. And then the acceptance, acceptance is beautiful because it's very much a word that is based around despite of things. Despite of that, I can accept this situation. And when I think growing up, oh my God, I was a bit of a handful. And my parents had to go through a lot of acceptance with me because then we can truly advocate. We can truly advocate now. So I had a situation a while ago when somebody came up behind us and went to stroke Arthur. Arthur lost his shit. Sorry, sound language, but he had a go at the person. The person then had a go at me, and then it's very easy for me to have got into an argument with that person. But I thought, no, I'm going to advocate. So the first thing I did was apologise to Arthur. And I had to move on for his sake because he wasn't comfortable. So I was advocating for him right then, even above myself, because my Bob wanted to stop there and say, "Don't you dare, blah blah blah. Don't you know who I am?" So advocacy actually often is about me thinking, no, it's not about me, it's about my dog.
Yes.
It's not about those family members who are saying, you've only got a 2-year-old dog, they should be off the lead, running around chasing the ball. Why aren't you doing it? It's like, actually, it's because of my awareness, my acknowledgement, and my acceptance, I can advocate. So it's a powerful place to be, I think.
It's a powerful place to be, but I think you have illustrated so well. There is a huge amount of energy that's just gone into all of this thought processing. And I think people should pat themselves on the back when they get to that feeling of contentment, that they're aware, they've acknowledged, they've accepted, they know that they're in a better position to be able to advocate for their dog. High five. Do you know what? Most people bypass it. So, congratulations. It is the hardest thing. looking after a dog that you know their world is getting smaller and life is getting more complex and the things that make them happy are harder to reach. It is emotionally traumatic, isn't it?
It is, and there's a grieving process,
Mm.
actually a genuine grieving process sometimes when we don't have the life or the, because there is an element of loss. We perceive a life with our dog that we haven't got, or that we did have, but now we don't have. So there's a lot of stuff, and even when you get to acceptance and you think, okay, I've gone through these things, it's actually about processing ultimately, isn't it? It's okay, I've heard what the vet's told me, I've processed it, I recognize it, I acknowledge it, I accept it, and I realize what we've got to do, and I realize that things just won't be the same. They'll be different, not better than or worse than, they'll be different. So it's accepting that, being advocacy. But the thing is, it still doesn't mean that suddenly everything's all kind of unicorns and rainbows.
No, I don't think you suddenly have everything lifted.
Yeah, and we as professionals, it's very easy to think, oh, isn't it wonderful? My clients accepted this now, and they're doing all the stuff. We can withdraw our support mechanisms at that point, when in fact that's when they need it probably the most.
Right.
We need to be that safe anchor for them, that safe space. We need to try as a professional to be their return to safety when things are tough and they need a chat.
Yeah, I've got a good question. This is from the lovely Laura. Laura's massive part of the CAM team. Love her much. Can you talk a bit about acceptance whilst there is potential for change, or is acceptance not applicable if you're hoping for improvements from, e.g., the multimodal management, even though OA is a lifelong disease?
That's a really good question. I think we've got to make sure that when we look at anything, when we talk about any kind of way of trying to modelling things, because we've just happened to put a model together with these words, it's very rare that it's going to be the same for everybody, that it's going to be in that order, that kind of fashion, that kind of linear way. And I think the good thing is, I think in the early stages, Laura, you kind of do have to go through awareness and acknowledgement. When you get to a level of acceptance, that's quite fluid then, I think, because you're accepting things as they come along. We're talking very much about people's emotional connection to things here. Somebody could turn up and just accept the fact that they've gone to see the vets and the dog's in pain because they haven't gone through all this stuff. It's just an acceptance and that's it. And it can be a cursory acceptance, actually. If you don't really, truly make yourself available to be aware and think about what that means and truly acknowledge it, then the acceptance can be quite shallow, actually.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, accept it.
Very 2D.
Very 2D. So I think that's a great question. I think as long as we're always getting that feedback, and I think the notion of the potential for change is what a great phrase is. The potential for change is a way of kind of summing up the notion of hope, I think. And I think that's one thing that we should always offer people, even through this process. Even my husband in a hospice setting, you'd be surprised how much hope there is there. You wouldn't think it, would you? But there just is.
No, that's a challenging one, isn't it?
Well, what is hope? Hope is about, this is why this movement through these kind of A's is so important, because when we focus in on what we can, when we've got to that acceptance and we're advocating, and then we can recognize what is, the adaptations that we make and what is doable, you start to focus in on the things you can do and not the things you can't.
Yes.
And that always provides that potential for hope. We can feel hopeless, can't we, with some of these diagnoses?
Yeah. But hope is quite a hard one to manage, especially depending on what, that's expectations though, isn't it? Hope and expectations kind of fit together. Is hope more of the emotional aspect of the cognitive expectation?
Yeah, so hope is very much around positive outcomes.
Yeah.
When you think about it, it's the seeking of a positive outcome. So that does depend upon your expectations.
Yeah.
And what that outcome should look like, right? That's the point. That's why this stuff is so important, and that's why adaptations, especially adaptations to expectations, are really important.
Yeah.
You can have people who have had quite devastating diagnoses, but can still have an optimistic outlook.
Yes.
Because their hope is based on what they can do tomorrow, not the fact they might not be able to do it in a year's time.
Yeah.
So this is why these kind of journeys are such personal things, Hannah. I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Us as practitioners, we have to recognise that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to take the opportunity to do a few take homes that I know that since running CAM and talking to people like you and getting all these amazing gems, I do know that before I open that consult room door, I check in. I know that I do it every time now because I'm very aware in my past, my emotional state, my mood, how busy I was could affect my consulting. I could be curt, I could be short, I could be more abrupt. So I do check in, and that has made a massive difference to me. Whenever the owner's in the room, I do have my little Bob. He's a little good Bob. When he's got his good hat on, he's like, be aware that they might have had a bad day. So if they're short, if they're abrupt, if they're a bit heavy-handed, or if they're curt with their questions, or they don't seem to listen, I do try and make myself go, don't react. We don't know what's going on in their life. So that's something else that I know I've started doing. And something I've done in the last few years, which has made a massive difference, is I manage their expectations by phrases like, I would expect you to see improvement in 3 to 5 days, and this is what I'd expect you to see. So if we're not seeing that, then we need to readdress this, rather than what can be quite easy to go, here's some pills, see you in a week, because that's the nature of the time, the constraints. But trying to actually leave them with a concept of what to expect, my clients come back so better engaged. And so they would be some things that I've definitely learned in the last few years. What about you?
I think as I've moved more and more towards a dog-centered approach, the thing that's come along with that is understanding more and more about the connective relationship between these families and their dogs, and you've got multiple nervous systems to kind of factor in. And I think one of the most important things, what you just said there is really important. So somebody's going to come in, maybe they're angry, maybe they're frustrated, maybe they're whatever. And when they're in that state, that Bob, the more negative side of our brain, can just get a bit spiky from it. And actually their brain is waiting to get that spikiness back because it wants to be validated. And actually one of the most powerful things you can say to anybody to help their Bob back off is just to say something as simple as, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. I get that.
Yeah.
Even if I think, oh God, what a load of whatever, I'm going to say, I hear you. I get that. Or to say something like, so what I feel you're saying to me, even though they might have said it in a not horrible way, but in a quite a combative way, just to say, I feel what I think what I hear you saying is.
Yeah.
And then they still feel heard. And I think that's a great way to back that brain off, because they're kind of going to come in thinking they're not going to be a lot of the time. And if we become dismissive, if we talk over them, if we're just thinking, okay, I've heard you, but I'm just going to say the same thing again.
Yeah.
It's just, so we're losing the chance to support this stuff, which is what we try and do. But remember, really important for all the professionals listening, we can't take on the burden of the suffering of others. We can't. There's only so much we can do, and we're not responsible for final outcomes. That's my genuine thing that I talk about, and I passionately believe it. We are responsible to try and find the best outcomes, but there are just too many variables, Hannah. Are they going to take the medication? Are they going to decide to go and do something a little bit more, whatever, off-piste about it? Are they going to listen to us or not? Short of us moving in, what can we do?
Absolutely.
This is what I'm trying to do, and be available to their needs so we can help them navigate. But if they're not available to that, remember, everything's an invitation, then what can you do ultimately? It's sad, and it affects us. It does, because you think, oh God, I might not see that.
I think it's a massive influence of the high attrition rate in the vet sector, is because the pressure to deliver a successful final outcome, just like that, it's huge. So being able to say, I've put everything in place, but now the onus is on you. And Yeah, I think that's hugely important.
And it's reasonable, I think. So you're my client, trying to help you. I'm turning up in an empathetic, compassionate way. I have my CAKE acronym: compassion, awareness, knowledge, and empathy.
I
If you
love
happen
all
to
your
say CAKE,
analogies.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
that's
all
so
love
really
CAKE, right?
strong.
So if you turn up with CAKE, maybe that we could do this as another chat to unpack those. But compassion, awareness, knowledge, and empathy. So I'm going to turn up with CAKE, and that's a good place to start. Even if I try and do things the right way, you and I can see you're vulnerable. I can see you're upset. I can see you're going through all these things. There's only so much I can do. At some point, I have to recognize Hannah is a mature adult who has a story that I don't know enough about. And at some point, I have to say, over to you now. There has to be that point. Otherwise, we are shouldering the burden of others.
Yes.
And we can't. Now, sometimes we do. So I've got a client at the moment who I may as well move in with them, to be honest, because but that's fine every so often. But if that is your every other client, where do you go with that? It's just really hard. So, and we need to talk about these things, because one of the worst things is this notion of being professional.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean, actually, other than a lot of people who are trying to do their jobs in a straitjacket of not allowing any form of emotional release or ability to connect. Because actually you can hide behind that being professional thing, because it's a great way to put a barrier. Boundaries are important, as we talked about earlier, but they shouldn't be barriers to unmet need.
Yes.
And I think that's something we have to think about as professionals. But it's an individual story, of course. It's an individual story.
But I love that. As you say, the linguistics, barriers versus boundaries. What a different connotation in your head, isn't it?
Yeah. And the trouble with putting up barriers instead of boundaries, so you could get hurt by a situation and could find it very difficult, or whatever it is, professionally, personally, doesn't matter. The temptation is to put up some barriers because you think, I'm going to be protected more by having a barrier. The good thing about the barrier is it will probably protect you, but it also stops you connecting.
Yeah.
So it becomes self-defeating over time because you isolate yourself through barriers. When you think about it, the way of thinking, okay, what do these boundaries? I need to rethink my boundaries so I can still be available to what life has and the people around me, but make sure that those protection plans, what does that look like? And the thing about boundaries as well is you can negotiate boundaries. You have your non-negotiables, and you have those boundaries where you think, I would never do less for a client, but there are some clients that I will do more for.
Yeah.
And those are the ones where I negotiate some of those boundaries, because I feel something there, and that's important. We need to have agency to do that as a professional.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are interesting things. Boundaries are something we need more education on, really, because they're very misunderstood about what boundaries are. And I say people can hide behind a cloak of professionalism, which just means they're unavailable.
Yeah.
And you can almost end up just going through the motions then.
No. And I just, I must admit, I'm thinking to myself, how would vet students, vet nurses, therapists, students, unfortunately, I think our curriculums are so chock-a-block, trying to engage them in communication strategies and all of this concepts. I don't think that they are available at that point because they're not in the context of offering care. So they're not being put in the daily situation of needing these skills. But good God, if ever you wanted to just go, this is my knowledge shoulder, I'm giving it to you. 20 years my junior. Let me tell you this stuff, because it certainly helped my career being much more aware of all of this.
And it's crazy when you think about it, because to give somebody the knowledge to do the job in a functional way, without the knowledge to do it in an emotionally safe way, it's no wonder we have such attrition. I go back to my husband again, only because he's my husband. But, he gets supervision every month. There are things in place all the time. They get a huge amount of input on the job regarding communication styles, effective communication, effective listening, healthy boundaries, protecting self-esteem. It just comes as part of the general CPD.
Doesn't end the message.
But it's an easier, we need to encourage people. First of all, we need to find out who's going to do the CPD, and then encourage that it's still worth your while to do CPD about something that will protect your professional career for longer, and not just something that looks at the back end of a cat.
Yeah. So I did some work on this recently, and more about effective communication, and the figures in the vet industry regarding feelings of not having the skills to hold effective communication is huge. You know, it's like
Yeah.
68% of vets feel that they haven't been given the skills, but 98% of vets feel that effective communication is as valuable, if not more valuable, than the content of their communication.
Wow.
And then, but when you actually ask those postgraduates, those people in practice, right, so your CPD allowance, your CPD time, how are we going to invest this? Are we going to go into communication strategies, emotional health strategies, or are you going to go and learn about feline or urinary tract disease? They all went there. So the vast percentage wouldn't invest their available resources in continual professional development in things that they knew were hugely important to their self-care. It's very fascinating.
It is, and I think maybe the powers that be need to think about what that looks like from a pastoral care point of view. So Kieran CPD, they are expected to do a certain amount of time based on self-care. Maybe that choice shouldn't be offered. It should be a case of X amount of hours. This is it, and we also expect to do this as well, because it's important. It's important for the professional, but it's also important for the end user, for the client, of course.
Exactly.
We can, and we all do our jobs better when we're in a better state. Remember what we talked about earlier? Compassion fatigue is primarily about lack of compassion for ourselves. And the trouble is, you come into a new job, and it's no wonder they want to do the academic-y stuff, because there's probably a little bit of their Bob thinking, I've got to show worth here and show that I'm going to be good at it. So it all feeds in. It all starts with these conversations, though, Hannah.
Yeah.
So the big difference, just as a finishing note, really, being vulnerable is the key.
Yeah.
People think, well, that's weird. Why would you want to be vulnerable? But there is a big difference between being vulnerable, which is sharing, and being open, and feeling vulnerable.
Yeah.
We want people to feel less vulnerable and to feel empowered enough to be vulnerable. So feeling vulnerable is about giving away control and power. Being vulnerable is about taking it back. The biggest antidote to shame is being vulnerable. So I talk about my breakdown, I talk about my drug issues and that kind of thing. I talk about those freely when it's the right time to, and I just shout it from the corner of the street. Because I'm not going to feel shame for that. It's part of my story, and I will be vulnerable. And I will, when you are vulnerable, when you be vulnerable deliberately, it gives permission to others to think, Joe, I hear that. I feel that. That's me too. And maybe you see more hands go up in the room then.
Totally do. I remember, so I'm quite happy being vulnerable, because for me, CAM is my purpose, and I truly believe that I'm lucky that I found something that I so passionately believe I can leave this world having done something good. So being vulnerable on CAM, I'm pretty comfortable with that. So I'm happy to tell people things that I wish I could have done better, learn from my mistake. And you can see the room changes. It changes because they feel safe to share their stories or ask questions. So I love it. I love it. We should all be.
That's the wonder of Hannah and the wonder of CAM for me. It's just creating safe spaces where some of the taboos around arthritis, there are a lot actually, even within clinical profession, can be broken apart because somebody's been vulnerable first.
Very true. Very true. Lovely note to end on.
Okay.
Well, I want everybody that's been listening to say an amazing thank you to Andy, because it's just so fluid. Like, it's already 73 minutes. Holy moly, where's the time go? For people that weren't at the beginning, please do consider supporting CAM by looking at our book called Why Don't You Listen? It is a beautiful illustrated kids book trying to teach people to be aware of the signs of pain and how pain can lead to behavioural changes, and behavioural changes can lead to unwanted situations. None of us ever want to be in the situation that you're at the vet saying, I don't trust my dog anymore. What do I do? So please do go and purchase the book. It is available in the shop. I'm sure one of the lovely CAM ambassadors will do a link. All funds go back into supporting CAM's growth across the globe. Thank you, Andy. I can't wait to the next one. It's just like an armchair. It's just like a very comfortable armchair. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I wish you all well, guys. Take care.
Bye.